Every so often, a camera is released that is such a huge leap forward in terms of specs and performance that we know it's going to change the filmmaking game for good. And with the release of the Panasonic S1H, we may well be looking at that camera. Now this hefty hybrid is aimed squarely at the pro level creator. The recommended retail price of £3,600 definitely suggests that. But for that sizable budget, you're getting a fully formed cinema camera in this hybrid mirrorless body. It features a 24.2 full frame CMOS sensor and Venus image processor that is capable of a myriad of resolutions, frame rates and bit depths. From a full frame 6K readout in a 3:2 aspect ratio to 5.9K in 16:9. The S1H can also internally record 10-bit cinema 4K at up to 60 frames per second with a Super 35 crop, or 422 10-bit 4K in 30 frames per second using the full frame. Dropping down to 1080p, you have the higher frame rate options available to you of up to 180 frames per second cropped, or 144 frames per second in full frame with audio. The S1H further proves its pro-level credentials by offering a massive 14 stops of dynamic range. It also makes available to you the full V-Log profile as seen in the Varicam models such as the EVA 1. For anamorphic users, there's also a host of internally de-squeezed record options available to you, meaning that you can take full advantage of that 6K sensor with the in-body image stabilization. Now, Ibis is a fantastic feature in this camera, offering gimbal-like performance with its 6 stops of stabilization. Moving to the sides of the camera, we're presented with a host of connectivity options, from high-speed USB 3.1, 3.5mm mic input and headphone outputs, and a HDMI output which allows for full 5.9K RAW recording onto external recorders. The S1H also features dual SD card slot that are fully backwards compatible, UHS-2 V90 compliant. Recording can be done in relay, allocation or backup modes with the 2 card slots. That UHS-2 compliance is a really important feature when you consider the bit rates that this camera is going to be recording at. If you're using the 6K or the 5.9K options, we're looking at 200 megabits per second, which in itself isn't anything to write home about. That's because it uses the H.265 compression. However, all of the 4K modes use H.264 compression and have a bitrate of up to 400 megabits per second. Now that means that V90 cards are a must if you want to record 4K internally on this camera. To the rear of the camera is where you get to see the impressive 3.2-inch touchscreen display. This is bright and easy to use even in bright daylight conditions, which is really important as a camera with this many features, you will be spending a lot of time within that menu. Now that screen adds a huge amount to the ease of use with the S1H, aided by being able to both tilt out within its frame for low shooting, but also being able to fully articulate out to the side to form a fully front-facing monitor. Now that's going to be especially helpful for those single shooters. Behind the screen is where we see the fan cooling system. This is external to the camera body itself, allowing for the S1H to maintain its weather sealing. The fan, which has a customizable cutout control, allows for the unlimited record time, even at the full frame 6K readout. The always-on top display is one of my favorite features of this camera. It's easy to use at a glance and is fully customizable, even allowing for metering of audio levels whilst in record modes. Now, using a fully formed cinema camera in this hybrid form factor is actually a really enjoyable experience. In no way does it feel cheapened by its miniaturized size. It is incredibly premium in hand, it's very ergonomically designed and very weighty, the body alone coming in at over 1 kilogram in weight. Now, it is worth noting that this camera does take some time in getting used to, especially if you're coming from a DSLR or mirrorless filmmaking background. Despite some similarities with the GH5, this camera really is more akin to the Varicam lineup, such as the EVA 1, and users not familiar with a fully fledged video camera will have a learning curve to overcome. But this is made a whole lot easier with all the video assist features that Panasonic have managed to cram in. Correctly exposing and grabbing focus is made a joy with the options available to you in camera. The assist tools will all be familiar to experienced filmmakers, from focus peaking and focus zooming to 2 simultaneous zebra meters. The vector scoping for white balance and adjustable waveform metering are also present. Essentially, every tool you could ever want for getting the shot is in this camera, making this a really complete feeling filmmaker's tool. Both on paper and in use, the Panasonic S1H just oozes quality, and the image quality of the camera doesn't let it down either. This is by far the best looking camera I've managed to get my hands on for a long time. It not only lives up to its price tag, but also its credentials of being a miniaturized cinema camera. Having access to the full frame 6K readout in that 3x2 aspect is a nice addition, allowing for multiple post-production options. But in truth, I found the 16x9 5.9K far more usable. That added frame size real estate doesn't come with a hefty data price tag either, as it's compressed using the H.265 codec, so only has a 200 megabits per second bitrate. Moving into 4K, for me, is where this camera really shines. The Super 35 4K, 60 and full frame 422 10-bit 4K video files are just simply gorgeous to work with. The scope and depth for editing is almost endless, and being compressed in H.264 actually makes these 4K files a lot easier on your processors to edit with. However, it is worth noting that the file sizes and bit rates in 4K are huge at 400 megabits per second. Thankfully, the dual UHS-2 SD card slots allow for those newer V90 cards, and in truth, you will need them to get the best out of the S1H. The low light performance of this camera is also worth noting here. Now, being a full frame sensor, we know that typically it's going to be pretty good in low light conditions. But additionally to this, Panasonic have used their dual native ISO technology in this camera. This switches noise circuitry depending on the ISO settings. This dual native ISO system renders a fantastic low light performance with a really clean image. The S1H is a camera that far outstrips its unassuming form factor and even its price tag, offering all the features, specs and quality that any filmmaker could ever hope for. Buying this camera today may well set you back $3.5 grand, but with its quoted shutter life of 400,000 cycles and that full frame 6K image, this is a filmmaking tool that will likely last you for many years to come. So for certain, the Panasonic S1H is that huge leap forward in the filmmaking world that we've all been waiting for. A 6K full frame filmmaking powerhouse that's far more akin to the EVA 1 than its GH5-like body would ever suggest. For some more information on this camera, there's some links below, and we'll see you in the next video.